The city of Santa Clarita, California, just north of Los Angeles, continues to grieve this morning following this week's deadly shooting at Saugus High School.
Santa Clarita, California, coming together to remember two students killed in last week's school shooting. A motive for that attack is still unknown.
The Saugus shooting happened here this morning in Santa Clarita. Santa Clarita law enforcement says a student who turned 16 years old today just walked onto campus into the quad there, pulled out a semi-automatic handgun from his backpack and shot 5 of his classmates, then shot himself.
On November 14th, 2019, the students of Saugus High School lived through a school shooting. Unbeknownst to them, the shooter was one of their own, a student and later, his own victim. This is different, as this was not just a tragedy, but also a suicide. According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, suicide was the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S., and in 2018, 48,344 Americans died by suicide, with a whopping 1.4 million suicide attempts in the same year. In this video, I will address suicide, explain the broader sociological causes for its growing impact on the families, students, and workers of the United States. But before we dive into the broader societal pressures, it is important to briefly address possible individualistic explanations for the rise of suicide in America. Depression, unhappiness, guilt, hopelessness, rejection, and worthlessness are all possible explanations for suicide that are more focused on the individual's reaction, not greater societal influence. These are all common ways that people associate with causes of suicide. But what about broader influences? How about their education, gender, and socioeconomic status? That I will examine in more depth with the rest of this video. First, we will dive into socioeconomic impacts. America's capitalist-based economy has caused a huge wealth gap, leaving the top 1% with an overwhelming share of the wealth in the U.S. Following Gilbert's model, people in the United States are stratified by class, with the immense disparity of wealth creating working poor and underclass. Now, you may ask, Justin, how does this relate to the rise of suicide in America? Well, French sociologist Emile Durkheim separates suicide into 4 categories: anomic, altruistic, egoistic, and fatalistic, with fatalistic being the main focus here. According to Durkheim, fatalistic suicide occurs under conditions of extreme social regulation, resulting in oppressive conditions and denial of self and of agency. In such a situation, a person may elect to die rather than continue enduring the oppressive conditions, such as the case of suicide among prisoners. Going back to the wealth gap, the working poor and underclass earn so little of the national wealth that individual agency plays little to no role in social mobility. People in these classes may feel stuck and trapped, blaming the situation on the oppressive conditions of the wealth gap. The American dream seems so impossible that death may be a better option than no hopes of success in the future. Other factors also contribute to this, such as job inequality and intersectionality, which is the idea that various systems of oppression intersect and mutually constitute one another. They are not separate and do not operate in isolation. That brings us to education. Today, success in America's education system means earning high marks and attending the best colleges. However, now with cutthroat competition at home and overseas, any lacking performance may mean not having a successful future. A major cause for this is societal expectation placed on the individual. If you don't perform, then you don't feel like you belong. This relates back to anomic suicide, which is an extreme response by a person who experiences anomie, a sense of disconnection from society and a feeling of not belonging resulting from weakened social cohesion. Anomie occurs during periods of serious social, economic, or political upheaval, which result in quick and extreme changes to society and everyday life. In such circumstances, a person might feel so confused and disconnected that they choose to commit suicide. These students may not feel immediate separation from their relationships, but rather fear it to such an extent that it merits losing their lives. Now connecting both education and the economy, we arrive at the income achievement gap and opportunity gap. Families with lower incomes generally have less access to basic needs and school funding than families with higher incomes. This creates a difference in academic opportunities between groups. This is where the struggle between agency and broader societal impacts comes in. The overwhelming, stifling nature of socioeconomic status and education negatively impacts individuals' ability to ascend up the social ladder, and with this comes feelings of depression, unhappiness, worthlessness, and hopelessness that can culminate into suicide. It is important to note that education and the economy are not the only sociological issues for the rise in suicide. They're just issues that I want to focus on in this video. For example, gender. The suicidal rate is actually much higher in males than females, raising the question on how gender may play a role. Perhaps another example is domestic issues like problems surrounding the family. Increased flexibility of family structure could have negative impacts. Actually, let's quickly talk about gender. Gender is social. Now, connecting gender to suicide, we must look at heteronormativity. Heteronormativity is, according to Westbrook and Schilt, the suite of cultural, legal, and institutional practices that maintain normative assumption that there are two and only two genders, that gender reflects biological sex, and that only sexual attraction between opposite genders is natural or acceptable. Heteronormativity most notably impacts the lives of the LGBTQ community, placing an external stress that contains violence, discrimination, harassment, and rejection according to CAMS Care. This high level of physical and sexual violence is related to suicidal thoughts and behaviors, and the continuance of these practices can only serve to increase the rate of suicide in America. But besides just focusing on the impacts, we should also discuss what can be done to solve this issue. Well, perhaps by analyzing the sociological impacts more intensively and connecting them to individualistic causes, we can help lower the rate of suicide in America. Options like reforming the education system or passing legislation that allows people more opportunities to succeed. Or better yet, enroll in a sociology class. I know just the person for the job.